Okay, so this presentation was one of the more interesting ones, and this was by Dr. Christopher Gardner, who is a nutrition scientist at Stanford University, and he talked about protein. And we always people are very interested in protein. And he had a disclosure. He is a consultant for Beyond Meat, or he did some research with funding from Beyond Meat, which is one of these meat alternative companies. So he's letting us know that he has some financial agreement. So we have this fixation about protein. He had these pictures of all these processed foods up here where they just really want to let you know that there's protein in there because people think that we don't get enough protein. And so his thing is they did a study and they figured out how much protein do people need, and this on the bottom end is 25 grams a day of protein, and on the higher end was like 54 grams of protein. And so you would think, so the average requirement of people is probably around 30 something grams. And so you think you would set the requirement at 30 something grams. However, if you set the requirement here and people meet this requirement, half the people aren't getting enough. Half the people are getting too much. So they set the requirement here at like the 97th percentile. So if you take just the required amount, uh, for 97% of the people, you're getting too much protein. And for 3%, you're not getting enough protein. So the recommended amount is, yeah, so here we go. All right, so this is the slide. The recommended amount of, so the average requirement, okay, let's say that you're 175 pounds. The average requirement is 52 grams of protein a day. But they said the average daily allowance, so what they recommend is 64 grams a day. Okay, but the average American intake is 96 to 120, so almost double the recommended amount. And remember, the recommended amount is right here. It's on the high end. So people are eating this much protein. It's way more than you need. So their insufficient protein intake for an American is essentially not happening. Everyone eats almost double the amount of protein that they need. And here's the funny thing about protein. There's no storage. So if you eat too much protein, you can't store it anywhere. If you eat too much fat, it gets stored as fat. If you eat too much carbohydrate, it gets stored as glycogen or fat. Okay? If you eat, and then the glycogen and fat can be turned back into the fat or carbohydrate. The protein, you can't store protein. You either use it to make proteins in your body, or it gets converted into fat or carbohydrate. Now, a couple of some amino acids can be converted back. Those are the non-essential amino acids. We can make those, and so there is some kind of functional storage of that. But generally, protein that you don't use that day or after that meal is not stored. You can't build up an excess of it. So let's keep going. He goes through the Eat Lancet thing. And they're like, oh my goodness, where will I get my protein? And this is the thing that I thought was very interesting. So he talks about there are 20 amino acids that we use. And amino acids are these things, I'm sure most of you know, but proteins are essentially chains of amino acids. So they're it's like a ladder, and each rung is like a different amino acid, and you can make a protein by stringing together these 20 amino acids. And the way that you string them together and the way they fold determines what kind of protein it is. Is it the protein in muscle? Is it the protein on the receptors? Is it like the A spike protein? Is it like a DNA transcription machine? Is it an enzyme? All these things, they're all made with these 20 amino acids. And so he asked this question. Which of the following statements is most accurate about protein derived from plants? Number one, plant foods do not have protein. Okay. All plant foods are missing some essential amino acids. Or some plant foods are missing some essential amino acids. And four, all plant foods contain all 20 amino acids, essential and non-essential. So I initially thought that 3 was the correct answer because we are taught in medical school and in biochemistry class that plants are not a complete protein, that they're missing a few essential amino acids, and any single plant food does not provide all the amino acids. That you have to eat like 2 different kinds of plant foods. Like you have to eat rice with beans, and then you have a complete protein, or you have to have like nuts with broccoli, and then you have a complete protein. So that's what we thought, and most people I think pick this option. However, it's 4. 4. All plant foods contain all 20 amino acids, essential and non-essential. That's the right answer. And then if you think about it, that just makes sense because plants make proteins, and it's not like they make proteins with only 19 amino acids and they just don't ever use like methionine or lysine or something like that. They use all the same amino acids we do. Um, so why do we think that how did this come about that we think that they're missing some amino acids? Well, it's because, okay, he goes through the Scrabble thing. Um, it's because they have slightly different ratios. They have them all, but the ratios are like slightly different. So here's egg protein. And so eggs and meat and fish and the stuff, those have protein profiles that are essentially perfect for us because we're animals and they're animals, and so the ratios of the amino acids that we have is the same as what they have. So if you look at salmon protein and chicken protein, you see that this profile looks very similar. Beef protein, pork protein. So if you look at these graphs, they have a lot of glutamate, a lot of asparagine, not too much cysteine, not too much tryptophan, but they look very similar, okay? Um, let's see here. I'm going to scroll this over a little bit. And then if you look at rice, okay, so see, look at black bean and rice, okay? So if you look here, so the profile is slightly different. The profile is a little bit different. And so what it is if you look at this, there's not that much lysine in rice protein. If you look how much lysine there is in beef, look at how much lysine there is in rice protein. So there is lysine, but it's just not. If you were having just rice and you were barely getting the amount, you wouldn't have enough lysine. Or if you look at black bean, there's not enough methionine. So if you look at this, look at how much methionine is here compared to in pork or in beef, the methionine is pretty low here. So but you see there's plenty of methionine in rice. So if you eat rice plus beans, then there's plenty of lysine in black beans. So you can kind of complement the two. However, um, if you look at this graphed out as essential and non-essential amino acids, you will see that these things look very similar. Okay, it's not like it's way different. It's just a little bit different. And like let's say you were gonna eat, this is a crazy diet, but let's say you were just gonna eat rice. You're just gonna eat rice, and that's the only protein source you're gonna have. Would you be okay? Yes, provided you ate enough rice. Because if you ate just double the amount of rice protein that you needed, then you would get way too much of this stuff, and you would get the right amount of lysine. So you would just waste the other stuff, but you get the right amount of lysine, which means you would be fine. You wouldn't be lacking in any amino acid, even if you ate just rice. And since Americans already eat double the amount of protein that they need, that wouldn't be hard to do. But anyway, that's crazy. No one's going to just eat rice. People are going to eat a wide variety of things. So that was very interesting to find out that essentially all protein sources are essentially fine. If you want to make sure you don't have a limiting amino acid, you just eat more than one kind of thing, or you just eat a lot of one kind of thing, and then you'll be fine. And most people eat too much protein anyway. Alrighty. I think that was that was the useful thing there. Oh, then he talked about using uh, fake meat, and fake meat essentially was better than real meat in terms of health effects and land use, which we kind of knew about. But we don't know what the um, long-term effects of plant-based meats are in terms of health. We suspect it's good, but it's not as good as whole food plant-based proteins. And so they did these studies where they compared it to meat and it's better. They did not do studies where they compare it to plant-based foods because Beyond Meat doesn't want to compare themselves to plant-based protein sources because they're not going to look as good. Yeah, so they had this he talked about his research where they um where they used meat and compared to Beyond Meat. And so they showed that basically this is kind of a carcinogen. It's basically there's more of it when you eat real meat. The weight loss, they somehow lost weight even though they ate the same amount with the plant-based meat. It's not a big difference. It's like less than 1 kilogram, and their cholesterol profile was better. Same thing. So, and then they did a study on athletes. So there were strength athletes and endurance athletes. So they got 12 runners and 12 weightlifters, and they had them eat 3 diets in random order. So they were crossover. So every person ate all 3 diets. One was a plant-based meat alternative. So that's like Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger, that kind of stuff. Then for a while they ate just animal meat, which is pork, chicken, beef, and then last they ate just whole food plant-based protein sources like quinoa, beans, lentils, that kind of stuff. And they tested their performance, and no difference across all of them. So did not make any difference. They didn't lose strength. They didn't lose body fat. They didn't gain. They didn't lose muscle mass, and perceived stress scale and perceived exertion and how much they did. It didn't make a difference. So basically, in terms of performance, they're all the same. In terms of health, whole food plant-based is the best. Plant-based meat's probably uh, slightly better than animal meat, and animal meat the worst. So the take-home message is everyone gets enough protein. Americans get twice the amount of protein you need. So even if you're there, no one's ever studied this, but like I go to a gym and people, want to eat lots of protein. And if you hear these Hollywood guys talk about it, like you hear The Rock talking about how he trained for this, or the guys that were in the Marvel movies, how they trained. They're like, oh yeah, I ate like salmon like 3 times a day and boneless chicken breast that was boiled, not with no oil, like 4 times a day. Then they were eating protein shakes. They are probably eating way more protein than they need, and these protein shakes are probably completely unnecessary. And there is no storage for protein, so it's just going to waste. And every American eats about double the amount of protein that they need. And therefore, even if you decide to take up weight training, you probably still have more protein than you need. And um, and all plants are basically complete proteins. They have a little bit less of one amino acid. And so as long as you're not eating just one kind of plant, you're going to be fine from a protein standpoint. You're going to eat as long as you get enough calories, you're going to get more than enough protein, even if you ate nothing but broccoli. Um, okay, so that was pretty interesting. Hopefully that was interesting to you. Thanks for watching.